There we go. All right, for the last couple weeks, we have been in John chapter 8. We're gonna finish it up today. I don't know why it's taking me so long to get through it. But we're gonna try to finish that up and maybe do all of John 9, in one swoop today. I feel a little bit, I feel like today we're sort of at the 35,000 foot level and not so deep into the weeds. So. Let's look at John chapter 8, that would be verse something. Let's call that like 48. It might say in your Bible, Jesus claims about himself. It says, then Jesus answered him, sorry. Aren't we, sorry, I'm not getting any of it right. These are not good glasses. They have chunks in them. The Jews answered him, Jesus, aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon possessed? I am not possessed by a demon, said Jesus, but I honor my Father and you dishonor me. I am not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly, I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death. At this they exclaimed, now we know you are demon possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that whoever obeys your word will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are, anyway? Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him and obey his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. You are not yet 50 years old, they said to him, and you have seen Abraham? Very truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. At this, they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds.
Can I ask you a question before you start?
Absolutely.
What does 50 years old have to do with it?
Well, probably a lot of the men who were standing there were, upper middle-aged men, such as myself. And I think they're looking at him, who is obviously not as old as they are, saying, you're not as old as we are. You're not even close. What do you mean you were around when Abraham was born? I think that is the sole reason for that line. You're not yet 50. Well, you got no gray hair. All your knees and shoulders still work. Don't talk to us about being old enough to see Abraham. Sit down, youngster.
Well, they're thinking of having seen him here on this earth,
Yes.
and how old would he have had to have been for that?
About 2,000 years old.
Because they're not thinking in the eternal realm where Jesus was before he came to earth, right? Isn't that where he would have seen Abraham?
Well, if you go back to the book of Genesis, there is at least one instance where it is possible that Jesus appeared to Abraham at his house to give him some news.
With company,
Oh, yeah.
right? Two others?
Three men showed up.
Oh,
We should just go back there and look for it. Susan's already on it. I could see the wheels spinning.
I just read that. That doesn't mean I'm.
Where are we having?
Oh, to the way back, Genesis, like. Oh, somewhere at least 12. Maybe 13. Of course, I have my weird Bible, so it's, gonna be harder to find.
Is that your chronological?
Yeah, it's my chronological Bible.
I like my chronological one, but not for Bible study, I found out.
It's 18.
18. My initial guess was gonna be 19, but 3 visitors, Genesis 18. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may wash your feet and rest under the tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way now that you have come to your servant." Very well, they answered, "Do as you say." So there are a lot of Bible scholars, commentators that refer to this as fancy scholarly word is Christophany. In Greek, this root has to do with appearing. And so it's Christ appearing. I don't know if it is or not, but it's within the realm of possibility. Because, really nothing is impossible when you're dealing with Jesus. And he's been existing since the beginning. He was a part of creation. He's the agent for creation. So, as somebody who is delivering a message from God, it wouldn't seem unusual that the word of God would come down in the flesh and make that presentation in person.
Is it interesting that Abraham recognized him at a distance? Or,
It is interesting.
okay,
I don't know what it is about him, but Abraham is clearly moved, especially by the arrival of these 3 visitors. And he does say, he refers to him as my Lord. I can't tell you because I'm not a Hebrew guy, if that is just, him saying sir, or if it's really a reference to capital L-O-R-D.
it's capital L in here.
Is it?
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
so.
It's interesting.
So Jesus and Abraham may actually have had a face-to-face conversation. These Jewish leaders say, "Get out of here. You're not old enough to have known Abraham. You'd have to be 2,000 years old. Sit down, be quiet. What are you talking about? You're crazy. Who do you think you are anyway?" I think that's a great question. Who do you think you are? And then Jesus, as he usually does, uses this opportunity to do some teaching and explaining. He says to these men, "You say that you know God, but you don't. You don't really know him. I know him." And there is a subtle difference. There's 2 different words that are used for knowing. And it could just be that, you know, when John's writing this down, he just was trying not to use the same word twice. But there are a couple of subtle differences in what those words mean. To the Pharisees, he says, so you say you've got some information about God. You're acquainted with him. You've got some basic knowledge, but you don't. I, on the other hand, have personal experience and knowledge with him. And it's very different. Sort of like, I know about pro football, or I have played pro football. Your grasp of it is going to be very different. The nerdiest NFL dork might have a list of stats and know all the records and everything. But if he hasn't played, he hasn't really experienced the game. Somebody else who is in the uniform, in the helmet, crashing people at 100 miles an hour on the field in the middle of a snowstorm, that's somebody who knows football. And that's what Jesus says. You all claim to know him, but you really don't. I know him intimately well. I've experienced him, and the thing is, you can tell that I've experienced him because I obey him. If you really knew him, you would show that through your obedience. But you're not obedient. So you really must not know him. That's something I used to tell my youth group a lot 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it is something that still pops up in my head once in a while here. Look, if you say that you've met Jesus and you're just still the same selfish jerk that you were when you met him, I'm not sure you really met him. Because if you had, you would have allowed him to make changes in you. This whole chapter, these disputes with the Jewish leadership that trickle all the way down to chapter 8, it really is, Jesus is putting a lot of distance between himself and these religiously devout pretenders. You say you know, but you don't, because you don't behave like you do. I obey. I don't know why you don't obey. They all love Father Abraham. Everybody looks all the way back. You know, we go back to Genesis 12. We're a part of the stars in the sky and the sand on the shore. He is our great father. We trace ourselves through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the 12 tribes in Egypt. We can trace all the way back. We're real sons of Abraham. He is our great father. And Jesus says, actually, you're nothing like your father Abraham. If you were a real descendant of Abraham, you would live the way that Abraham did. When God called Abraham from Ur, the challenge was, follow me. You go where I tell you to go. You do what I tell you to do, and I will bless you. I will make you a blessing. The whole world will be blessed through you. And so, what did Abraham do? Well, he picked up and he left. He went from Ur to Haran. He went from Haran down to Canaan. He went from Canaan to Egypt. He came back to Canaan. He lived there. And we see in more than one place that Abraham's faith was evident and pretty consistent. I can only think of one time really where, maybe two, where Abraham's faith in God was a little shaky. And it's not where I'd expect it. It's not in Genesis 22 when he has to take his son up the mountain to sacrifice him. He's all in there. Do you know when the one time is when Abraham gets a little sketchy faith-wise? No, that was just being dumb.
Well, when he was told they were gonna have a child.
I think it's when they go off to Egypt. Because things are not so great in Canaan at the moment. And the king there takes a look at Sarah and says, "That's a fine looking woman. I'd like to have her." And Abraham tells her, "Just tell him you're my sister." Why tell that lie? If God has brought you all this way here, why? The fact that he's afraid he's gonna get killed because his wife is so smoking hot is a concern. Faith-wise. I think that's the one for sure place. And the thing is that later on, it happens again in the same family. What was the other spot? It was right there. It'll come back when I'm not thinking about it. Abraham believed God and was credited to him as righteousness. We read that a couple different places in the New Testament. And when you get to Hebrews chapter 11, Abraham gets a big chunk of the story there. That he believed that God had a city with foundations. He was going to take him to be a resident there. He believed that God could bring Isaac back from the dead. That's where we get a little insight there. We don't see that in the story in Genesis or any place else, but in Hebrews 11 it says that Abraham figured that God could raise Isaac from the dead. So Abraham took Isaac up the hill, believing he was going to have to kill his son. But because he's a son of promise, how's God going to work this out? Well, apparently, he's going to resurrect him. Abraham is a faithful, obedient, believing man. Jesus says, essentially, friends, you say that you are descendants of Father Abraham, but you don't believe and you don't obey. I believe and I'm obedient. I'm closer to blessed Father Abraham than you are. Ah. Sure. Jesus is much more like Abraham and the prophets that they refer to than these Jewish men are. Knowledge and trust brought about obedience. They heard God's promises. They were anxious to see the fulfillment, while this current crowd standing in front of Jesus rejects the fulfillment. Abraham believed that God was going to bring all of those things that had been promised about. He was eager to see them. Prophets from Samuel all the way through Malachi and the rest of them at the end of the Old Testament. They were delivering messages from God to the people, and they believed that God was going to bring it about. Even the prophet Jonah, who is kind of the negative prophet in the Old Testament, he absolutely believed that God was going to do what he said, and he didn't want it to happen. If I go to Nineveh and give them this message about repentance or destruction, they're going to repent and you're going to forgive them. And I don't want to see it. so I'm not gonna go. He absolutely believed that God's promise would be fulfilled. These men in front of Jesus don't want to see the promise fulfilled, at least not the right way. And Jesus kind of throws a little dig in there as well. Look, if I said I didn't know God, then that would be a lie. Well, do you know him? Do you know God? Have you experienced him? Do you know him like we do? Well, if I say no, I wouldn't be telling you the truth. Absolutely no, I have experienced him. And if I say no, then I'm a liar just like you all are. You say you believe, but you don't. Actions don't bear it out. Um, Robert's question earlier was about, is there any significance about the being 50 years old? Jesus is not an old man. In the small group questions a week ago, I suggested to the leaders that, a number of questions that they could ask. One of them was about Jesus's stature. So like, in your mind, what does Jesus look like? How tall is he? What's he built like? Is he built like a fire plug? Is he kind of tall and willowy and gangly? What's he look like? Hair, eyes, etc. I don't know what Jesus' appearance looked like. One of the commentaries suggested that the years of ministry and just kind of the nature of life for a man in Jesus's time, that had a toll on his physical appearance. I suppose it is possible. Do you remember when Barack Obama became the president, what he looked like?
Yeah.
And what he looked like when he was done being president? And you can put any of the presidents in that, it ages them, whether it's, somebody who is 40 or somebody who's 50 or somebody who is 70. The strain of that job takes a toll, and I suppose it's possible the same could have happened to Jesus. I think this commentator is potentially sort of up in the night about this, that he was sort of haggard looking and worn out and grizzly and gray, but I don't think so.
He was Jesus. Me, he looks like the guy on the Chosen.
I was gonna say, you can't get that out of your head.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of.
Well, he didn't look
pictures look like
50.
too. So,
I don't know what 50 looks like in the, 80-30.
have your diet.
Didn't look like the picture of the blonde haired blue eyed Jesus.
Yeah, he is not California Surfer Jesus, not by any stretch. He looks more like, I don't know, pick a famous Jewish actor. He looks more like Paul Rudd and John Lovitz than he looks like me. So, but they can tell that they know he's a young man. What do we know about his age? There is one place where it tells us. Luke chapter 3.
Scary 30 race started.
Yeah, Luke 3:23, it says that he was 30 when he began his ministry.
Was he 37 when he was?
Probably around 33.
Oh,
Since we don't have Jesus's daytimer in his personal calendar, we don't know exactly how long everything took. But it was more than a couple years, but not more than 3 or 4. So he was young enough to be my kid at the end of his life. How can you have seen Abraham? Well, and he goes on. They talk about their father being Abraham. Jesus contrasts that and says, well, Abraham might be your father, But my Father is God. He refers to God repeatedly in this passage. My Father, more than once. He declares that he is God's son. And sort of like we've said the last couple weeks, I don't know how somebody can read through the Gospels and say Jesus never claimed to be something different or special. How can you say Jesus never claimed to be sent from God? How can you say he didn't claim to be the Messiah? Because it's like right here. There's no mistaking it. And then to just kind of wrap everything up with a great big contentious bow, he says, before Abraham was born, I am. Before Abraham became, before Abraham appeared, he doesn't say I was. He says I am in the present tense. Like he did earlier in the chapter, I am the light of the world. He uses that name for God again in the present tense, a continuous existence. He existed before Abraham, he existed during Abraham, he has existed since Abraham, and he always will. Again, this goes back to Exodus chapter 3, where Moses is on the mountain with the burning bush. Go tell Pharaoh to set my people free. Well, who should I say sent me? Is Moses' question. And the bush answers back, I am that I am. And somebody might say, well, there's just a misunderstanding there. Jesus really isn't claiming anything special about himself. But we know that that's not true because of how the people respond. What's their reaction?
Rocks at him.
They're looking for rocks to throw at him to kill him, not to, make him a smooth pathway to walk on. They're going to use these rocks to execute him for the sin of blasphemy. He has claimed to be equal with God. He has claimed to be God in the flesh. And we know that that everybody shares the understanding because Jesus doesn't argue with them. I mean, if it's just a misunderstanding, he could say, oh, fellas, I'm sorry, I used the wrong word here. What I meant to say was this. You've misunderstood me. Absolutely not. They could pick up rocks to kill him because he has claimed to be equal with God. He doesn't correct them. It's true. He is willing to die for the truth of that claim right here in John 8. And it's several chapters before his crucifixion. Because if somebody was going to pick up rocks to kill me because I had said something that didn't come across right, I absolutely would try to clarify that before the first rock got thrown.
Like how he slipped away. It doesn't say he slipped away.
Yeah.
Yeah, he slipped away. I mean, he's gotta be the center of attention.
Mine said he hid himself.
Hmm.
Which would seem supernatural.
How many of you have watched The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Have you seen that movie? Okay, so in the very first time Lucy goes into the professor's room and she sees the wardrobe and she opens it and she starts to walk into it to find the back, and she just keeps on going, and the coats that are in there become trees, and it's really like a slick, smooth thing that they do, how they make that transition. I sort of feel like maybe that's what Jesus what this would look like if I was there with my video camera. There's Jesus here, and I see Jesus walking, and then there's no more Jesus. That he just sort of dematerializes as he walks through the crowd.
Cause he did that several
Yeah. And why, what's the reason that he does that?
times.
To get away because it's not yet time. God's plan is gonna unfold according to God's calendar. The Jews are not gonna hurry this up or slow this down. So you wanna kill me right now? I know you're gonna kill me, but today is not the day.
I came up to a cliff one.
Yeah, in Nazareth, they were gonna do the same thing. They were gonna pitch him off the side of the mountain and he just wasn't there.
That would be harder because there was nothing. Go that way.
Where'd he go?
You
Yeah,
have to disappear, you can't go that way, and they're over
Disappeared
there.
into the cornfield, just field marshals.
also a great illustration of that. Just, you're there and you're walking, then all of a sudden, that's nothing. Again, in case you haven't seen The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Field of Dreams, when they're walking into the cornfield and they vanish also. It's a great picture. It's a Kevin Costner movie, which means I won't watch it. That man could not act his way out of a wet paper bag. All right,
You need to see highway now.
I've watched that one.
Like that. I was really surprised by
That's right.
his sidekick.
Woody. He is better there than he certainly was as Robin Hood. That was the worst. But that is a total digression from where we are. All right, let's go on to John chapter 9. Jesus heals a man born blind. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. The disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was, others said, nah, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I am the man. How then were your eyes opened? They asked. He replied, the man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. Well, where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said.
Well, that's a dumb question, because he was blind. He left Jesus blind, then they asked where he was.
How does he know what they look like?
All very good points and questions.
Following the subject.
No, it is absolutely right on the subject. I guess I hadn't worried about that too much, but that is an interesting question.
Could have been standing there. He
There-
wouldn't notice.
They're all interrogating this man. Well, who is he? And where did he go? Duh. Remember the part where I was blind and I couldn't see anything? I don't know what he looks like. I don't know where he was standing. I didn't see which way he went. Somebody led me to the pool. I dunked my face in the water and now I can see. I can see you. I can see her. I can see them. I can see the sky. I have no idea what the guy looks like who took care of me. I hadn't worried about that at all. It is a Sabbath day. When this occurs, we'll find that out later. Just to sort of refresh your memory, Jesus has been in the temple courts where he's been teaching. He's had these exchanges with Jewish leaders and with other Jewish men and women standing around listening to him. And so now it's clear that he has sort of left the Temple Mount, which is the southeast corner of the city of Jerusalem. I tried to find a really good map, and I didn't find any that I liked very well. So, and if you thought some of my other artwork was astounding.
Oh, I took a
wait till
look away.
today. Okay, so I know we've talked about it before, but Jerusalem sits up here on the top of the hill. So whichever direction you're coming from, you go up to Jerusalem. Okay, as if this is north that way and this is south that way, the Temple Mount is on this corner of the city. There are a bunch of steps that lead up into the temple area, and sort of all in this sort of sloping hills. But this is where there are a bunch of ceremonial baths where people would wash before they climbed up the stairs to go into the temple. But over this direction, even so, if you're looking from the top, and this is the hill, this is the Kidron Valley. Like down here at the base is the Pool of Siloam. Would have been a downhill walk. The Pool of Siloam was used during the Feast of Tabernacles, which has just taken place in Jerusalem. They would have to go down into the pool and scoop up some water and pour it out as a part of the festivities. So it's not only been until the last few years that they have uncovered the actual Pool of Siloam. They found another. There's pools all over the place. There was another one they thought was the Pool of Siloam, but probably like 20 years ago, they were doing some digging to fix a pipe, and they found steps, and then they found more steps, which kind of lead down into this big pool, which may have been as big as an acre. It's pretty good sized water. So everybody would have known where this is, would have been easy access, and all downhill for somebody who's visually impaired. Go wash in the pool. Is there a promise there? That just occurred to me.
But yeah, it's not in there.
Okay, they see a blind man, he's begging. The disciples say, who's guilty of the sin? Which sin is it that caused this man's blindness? Is it something that he did, or is it something that his parents did? Because that's the belief that any kind of physical ailment, physical deformity was because of sin. The question is, was it his or somebody else's? Was mom and dad's? Well, he's been blind from birth, so he couldn't have been guilty of sin from birth, because that's not how we believe things work. We're born with a tendency to sin, but we're not born guilty of sin. At least that's what how our church understands that. Jesus says, neither one. This man is blind, apparently, for right now. He is blind so that I could heal him right here in front of you. There's no promise. I'm the light of the world. Make some mud, put it on the eyes, go wash in the pool.
What was that guy thinking? What could have been going through his mind?
Well, I got nothing better to do, I guess
That
I
was not
can.
very nice.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing. Again, that had not occurred to me until I was just at the board. There, Jesus doesn't say, go wash in the pool of Siloam and see again. Would you like to see again? Wait a minute. Now, go wash your face, and when you've done that, it'll work. No, there's nothing. Just like he makes this mud, puts it on his eyes, and just says, go wash.
Well, the man didn't
Why
have
did
to
it
be
say
there.
night?
Yeah, the man hadn't actually asked to be healed. I suppose there could be a little bit of resentment, although it would be dumb. You know, because he makes his living by begging. And so if he's able to see, he's gonna have to go get a real job. He's gonna have to support himself.
Yeah, why did he say night is coming when no one can work? What does that have to do with it?
I think it's all about the timing. That Jesus, when we go back to the Old Testament, one of the promises about the Messiah is that he is going to, the lame are going to walk, the blind are going to see, the prisoner is going to be set free. It's like Isaiah 42 or 43. We look it up every month, and I can never write it down. There's multiple places where it first would, even back in the book of Psalms, which I did write that one down someplace. Psalm something or other. Psalm 146. The Lord sets the prisoner free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. He loves the foreigner, takes care of the widow and the orphan. I think that he has already referred at the beginning of the chapter in chapter 8 to being the light of the world. It's his second I am statement. The first one is I am the bread of life. This one is I am the light of the world. And so Jesus has come to bring light. He has come to illuminate people, to bring clarity and understanding. There's going to be a time when there's not going to be, when his light is not going to be here. And so he's going to shine as long as he can, knowing that his time is coming. He's in Jerusalem. If he's been teaching in the temple, he knows that he's going to be brought back there to stand in front of the high priest. As he walks through the edge of the city, you know, from the Temple Mountain, he can look across the valley and see the Garden of Gethsemane. He knows what's happening. And so as long as he's got air, as long as he is alive, he will shine that light as brightly as he can and share it with as many people as he can. We must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm here, I'm the light of the world. And one of the, well, I'll get there in a second. So after a few people question this man, where is the one who healed you? And he says, I don't know. Then things kind of take a turn. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. Okay, let me go over it again. He put mud in my eyes. The man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they were divided. I'm going to assume our friend Nicodemus is in that group. How can a sinner perform a miracle like this? Verse, whatever that is, 17. Then they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. And the man replied, he is a prophet. They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son? They asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? Okay. I'm not sure they even know he can. He didn't run home. It seems like people are talking to him. He's still got, his face is still wet. He's looking around, taking everything in. Hey, aren't you the beggar? How can you see? Well, this guy's made mud and he put on my eyes. I washed my face and now I can see. Well, you should go see the Pharisees. So they immediately take him. They don't believe him. And so they call for his mom and dad to come. The parents answered, we know he is our son and we know he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He'll speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had already decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That is why his parents said, he is of age. Ask him. I love these little editorial things that John throws in there. A second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man, Jesus, is a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. That make a great song. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered, I've told you already, and you didn't listen. What do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, it's a shock again. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. There's all kinds of things we could say about that exchange. I like the responses that the man gives. They sound a little, maybe just on the edge of being a little snarky and sarcastic, which I always kind of appreciate. So you've brought me back here to talk to you again. And you're asking me the question, how did I get my sight? I already told you, nothing's changed. He made mud, put it on my eyes, and told me to wash. Do you want me to tell you the story again so you can be a believer too? So you can follow? Love it. And I especially love the part at the end where they're convinced, and they just keep referring to Jesus as this sinner. This man is a sinner. This sinner did this. And his answer is, well, I don't know. I don't know if he's a sinner or not. I can't judge that. But here's the thing that I know for sure. I used to not be able to see, but now, because of what he did, I can. So, and then the statement would be, You do the math. Nobody has ever done anything like this before. If you go back to the Old Testament promises about what the Lord is capable of doing, bringing sight to the blind, making the lame walk, giving speech to the mute. You all got to be able to put this together. I mean, you're the Pharisees. How can you not figure this out? I was born blind. I've never seen anything until today. You want to know how it happened? I've told you what occurred. So you need to do the reasoning on your own. If only God can do something like this, then in geometry class, if you put QED at the end of the argument, you got an extra point. I think that's what he does. That is which has been shown, QED. That's a bonus point. It's a proof. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, QED. That is which has been shown. And I was blind, now I can see. Only God can give sight. So this man must be from God. Now, I am curious about how John navigated all this and put it together. I wonder how much of it was a style choice and how much of it is just the way that things unfolded. Did Jesus say, on this day, I'm the light of the world? And then in the same afternoon or the next day, shows that he is the light of the world by healing somebody who's been born blind? That's usually how I go with it, but I do suppose it's possible that John is sort of putting his gospel together in such a way to reinforce with real illustrations, examples of how Jesus is the light of the world. Yeah, he's there for sure. The light of the world doesn't just bring sight. The light of the world also brings judgment. So for this beggar man who sat in darkness for all his life, the light of the world shows up and gives him his sight. And now the world is opened up to him. Physically, there's been a big change. But the light of the world doesn't just bring some light and some sight. It also brings judgment. If you get up in the middle of the night, as I often do, without turning on the lights, which I never do, and you have to navigate your way through the house, sometimes you come across something with your foot or your hand that you think, what is that? I don't remember that being in the middle of the floor when I went to bed. And so you try to figure out what it is by the shape of it or the feel of it, the weight of it. It's like, what in the world is this thing that I have picked up? You might have a pretty good guess, like this feels like it is a wet towel full of bologna, but I don't remember that being here in the room. So what is it? And you flip on the light, you go, oh, it's just a cat.
It's just the cat.
Yeah.
Okay.
As soon as you turn on the light, the identification is clear. There's no longer any question about whatever the thing is. And it's the same with the light that Jesus brings. He makes everything clear. The light of the world shows up into a dark place. And now everybody can see everything more clearly, at least if they've got their eyes open.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly. Is this good? Is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? The light brings clarity, and actions and attitudes can be judged. He's brought physical sight to this man. And he's surrounded by people who say they can see, but they refuse to open their eyes. And his light shows exactly how in the dark they are. The Pharisees claim they can see. And because of that, they're going to be judged accordingly. They have had access to the truth. They have had access to God's light. They have studied it. They say that they know it. They've memorized it. They talk about it all the time. And so because they have had that kind of access and they insist that they know, they're going to be judged according to how they've behaved. I think the sort of the fun part of this story is that the light that Jesus brings into this man's life physically also ends up bringing some light spiritually. And I think that light just gets brighter and brighter in this man's life. And we can see it develop if we go through the chapter. Look at verse 11. How does he refer to the one who has healed him?
Man called Jesus.
The man they call Jesus did this. Okay. Scan on down to about verse 17 or so. Who does he say that the healer was there? A prophet. Okay. And by the time you get down to verses 35, down in verse 38, this man confesses personal belief in Jesus. He says, Lord, I believe. And then he says, he is the Son of Man. Apparently, the more he thought about it, the more times he told the story, the more he became convinced, I was actually touched by the Son of God. God brought me divine healing through this man, Jesus. He has to be Messiah. There's probably a little lesson in it for us if you're looking for some kind of application to take away. You know, if you're, I suppose we all go through some periods of some doubts or at least some questions. Like, I'm not sure what I believe. But then when you talk about what it is that God has done for you, how he has provided, how he has blessed, that just gives a little more depth to your life. I can't believe this. I don't know why I have any questions. Why do I have any doubts? I've had this experience. God has done this for me. Yeah, I absolutely believe. How could I not believe? How could I choose to believe anything but this? It's absolutely true. This has been my experience.
Sin's at home.
It's one thing to talk about something that happened to somebody else and say, well, that probably computes, that probably follows. It's another one to have personal firsthand experience and say, I know how I was. I know what my life was like. And then I had this encounter with Jesus and I've never been the same since. How could I choose to believe anything but that he is God's son? Big thoughts or questions or comments? I've been thinking about some friends a lot this week that used to be like super on with Jesus. They did some amazing stuff. And I'm not sure that that's the case anymore. And I sort of wonder what happened and if they. I feel like maybe they had to do some recounting of what it is that Jesus has done, how their life has just coincidentally unfolded to be exactly what it is. And how could they not want to believe and obey? Because that really is the kicker. It's not, as we pick up from 8 and 9 here, it's not just enough to say you believe that Jesus is God's son. There has to be action that matches up with it. There has to be obedience. That's how we know that we believe, by the change in our behavior.
By your fruits.
By their fruits, you'll know them.
But I think you also have to feed that, you know,
Mhm.
back in. Like when they were getting the law and stuff. He was very specific to teach these things to your children. You're supposed to talk about them when you're sitting at home and walking by the road, and if you just let that go. You don't ever even recount it to yourself and just kind of slip back into.
Yeah.
The world.
Is it known how many of the Jews converted at that time to Christianity?
I don't think I've ever seen a number. The numbers that I know for sure. We'll see at the beginning of the book of Acts. So in Acts chapter 1. After the crucifixion, when they're all gathered together, it says that there are about 120 who have been following. It was actually bigger than I thought. But then in the next chapter, after the day of Pentecost preaching on those southern steps there by the temple, 3,000 people are baptized in those pools right there. So that's at least 3,012. Sorry, 3,120. And then it says that that people were added all the time. I don't really know.
These Pharisees are so annoying.
The only Pharisees that we know, or people from the council that we know that were clearly followers of Jesus, are Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. From the language that we've read so far in the Gospels, especially John, it's clear that there are other Pharisees, that Nicodemus kind of represents a group of men who have not ruled out the possibility that he's the Messiah. At least. Anything else? Are there still Pharisees today?
No, I'm not laughing at your question, I'm laughing.
Well,
That's
isn't
the
there
answer
some
I
that
would,
still don't
that's the answer I would
Jesus is
give.
God?
The smart aleck answer would be, oh, I know plenty of Pharisees who are really uptight about following the letter of the law.
There's a whole building
While there's a
full of them
heart-
somewhere nearby.
Heart is empty.
Do they use that term anymore?
I cannot say one way or the other if that is
There's
true.
not a- You went to Jerusalem and see all the garb and some of the real dressed up.
Some of-
people look off.
So there are specific groups of Jews who are extremely they exhibit the same kind of legalism that the Pharisees did. When we were in Jerusalem, you know, it was warm. It was probably in the 80s, and there would be these big burly guys, full Robertson beards. I mean, just hairy. They've got curls coming down. They're wearing a big black wool overcoat and long dark pants and big black shoes. And on their head, they've got a big fur hat. And they're following a very specific set of rules about dress code, and it extends to the things that they eat and the people that they'll talk to. I don't know that they would call themselves Pharisees, but they are ultra orthodox something Jews. Yeah. Like, I could not do that, man. I would have burst into flame. Standing out here in the sun. Woo!
Sliding off.
That's right. All right, well, I'm gonna turn this off now. I will say that if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, feel free to make a comment. And if you'd like to be notified every time I do something on YouTube, just hit the little bell thing over there in the corner, subscribe and follow. And every time I do tricks, you'll be made aware of it.